In my last video, I talked about how I drive a 2002 Subaru WRX with 300,000 miles on it. Since I've always driven old high mileage cars, I've become very interested in how an EV will hold up as it ages. I believe a lot of you will be interested in this information, as I know many people have to purchase an older vehicle either by necessity or because they don't want to have a monthly car payment. When you look at old EVs, my number one question has always been, how healthy is the battery? See, we all understand this question because our batteries in our phones and laptops, they need to be replaced every 3 to 5 years. In electric cars, this is a much more serious question because you're talking about the most expensive part of the car. In new Tesla Model 3s and Model Ys, the battery cost is estimated to be somewhere between 21 and 24% of the car's base price. This percentage only gets higher as the car depreciates. For example, first generation Nissan Leafs. I did a quick survey of cars.com and found that these cars have a median price point of $8,000, which is very affordable. However, it's been reported that currently in 2020, Nissan charges around $5,500 US for a battery replacement. That doesn't include labor. This is over 68% of these cars' median value. So if you're going to be purchasing a used electric vehicle, it's really important to know how long you can expect the battery to last. In this video, I'm going to be covering this. I'll start with how lithium-ion batteries work. From there, we'll move on to the factors that cause a lithium battery to degrade and how to keep it healthy. And then finally, I'm going to look at some real-world degradation data for a few popular EVs. This is a really long one, so I've included timestamps in the description, and you can easily skip a section if you're not interested. To understand how batteries work, let's start with an electric motor, like the one in electric vehicles. All motors are powered by a flow of negatively charged electrons. The electrons move through the motor and they're not destroyed in the motor, but they do useful work before flowing out of the motor. I like to think of this electron flow as a stream with a water wheel in it. As water flows across the wheel, it does useful work on the wheel before continuing downstream again. At first glance, we might be tempted to assume that the water is unchanged before and after the wheel, but the laws of thermodynamics, they would beg to differ. As we know, water only flows downhill, and we see that while the water flows over the wheel, it has fallen by a height equal to the height of the wheel. Because of this, the water at the top of the wheel has a higher gravitational potential energy, and as it passes over the wheel, it gives this energy to the wheel, which makes it turn. Virtually the same process is happening in our electron stream and the motor, except instead of gravitational potential energy, the electrons are driven through the motor by an electric potential. There are different methods to produce an electric potential, but in this video, we're only considering a specific type of electric potential that's produced by a battery. In this case, it's called a reduction potential or a standard potential, and it's measured in volts. To understand this, let's look at an atom. The electrons are the negatively charged particles that surround the nucleus of the atom, and they really are the most important atomic particle when it comes to interactions with other atoms. I won't get into all the physics here, but some elements and molecules are naturally at a higher energy state, and that's due to the number and the configuration of the electrons around the nucleus. When an atom with a high electric potential loses one or more electrons, it moves to a lower energy state. Since all things in the universe like to go from high energy to low energy, these elements easily lose electrons. Other materials are naturally at a very low energy, which is also due to the number and the configuration of their electrons. These materials tend to easily accept electrons. Materials which easily lose electrons are defined as having a more negative standard potential, while those that more easily accept electrons have a more positive potential. The magic with these two materials happens when they are connected by a conductor or a wire. The electrons flow downhill from the material with the more negative potential to the material with the more positive potential. And just like that, we have an electron flow that can be used to do useful work. These material potentials and their associated electron flows form the basic working principle of a battery. For this example, I'll be considering a lithium cobalt oxide battery. Different manufacturers use slightly different chemistries, but the battery fundamentals are similar to what I'm presenting here. There are two halves in every battery. The one half is called the cathode, and the other half the anode. In our simplified lithium-ion battery, the cathode is made from lithium cobalt oxide, and the anode from graphite. When the battery is charged, an external power source drives a flow of electrons from the cathode to the anode. Electrons leaving the cathode are supplied by lithium atoms, which become positively charged after they lose their electron. As the electrons from the cathode enter the anode, this end of the battery becomes more negatively charged, while the cathode becomes more positively charged. Since the opposite charges attract, the two halves of the battery are electrically isolated to prevent electrons in the anode from moving back to the cathode. There's an electrolyte solution and a solid semi-permeable barrier that provides this electrical isolation between the cathode and the anode. The electrolyte is typically a lithium salt solution, and it actually contributes to the total amount of lithium in the battery. While this barrier prevents electrons from flowing back to the cathode, it does not stop the positively charged lithium ions from moving to the anode. And as more lithium ions move across the barrier, they balance the charge in the anode. Once all the lithium is transferred from the cathode to the anode, the battery is fully charged. If we look at this anode and cathode, we see that lithium has a highly negative potential, while cobalt oxide has a positive potential. In other words, the lithium easily loses electrons and the cobalt oxide readily accepts them. A charged lithium cell will have a voltage potential of up to 4.2 volts between the anode and the cathode. When the battery is discharged, the anode and cathode are connected by a wire, and in our case, it runs through a motor. The electrons separate from the lithium ions in the anode and flow along the wire to the cathode, doing useful work in the motor along the way. As the electrons enter the cathode, it becomes more negatively charged, which pulls the positively charged lithium ions back across the separator, balancing the charge. Once all the electrons and lithium ions have left the anode and moved to the cathode, the battery is said to be fully discharged. Now, saying a battery is fully discharged does not mean that the battery no longer has a voltage potential. For lithium-ion batteries, full discharge generally occurs when the cell voltage is around 3.2 volts. You could discharge the battery further, but doing so would permanently damage the cell. I've had this cell sitting around for a few years, so its voltage is extremely low, and I would never do what I'm about to do if it wasn't. With the battery cut in half, it was really neat to see the coiled anode and cathode inside. And after I removed the metal rod in the center, I could simply pull the coil out of the shell. Unrolling the coil was very simple. It was pretty much as easy as unrolling a precious roll of toilet paper. Once I got it unwrapped, I found two foils within the coil. The one was a copper foil that has the graphite anode material on it, and the other one was an aluminum foil that had the cathode material on it. In between these foils was a plastic separator. One of these guys contains roughly enough energy to drive a Tesla Model S 250 feet. However, after Tesla combines over 8,200 of these cells into the battery of their Model S, you can drive up to an estimated 391 miles. As we know, these numbers are for pristine cells straight out of the Gigafactory. Surely, after several years and thousands of miles, they will have lost some capacity, and the car will have lost some range. There are two broad groupings of battery aging mechanisms. On one hand is cyclic aging, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. The more times we charge and discharge a battery, the more it degrades. And so there's a specific amount of degradation tied up in each cycle. Modern batteries can be cycled somewhere between 300 and several thousand cycles before they lose significant capacity. When we look at electric vehicles, mileage is an indicator of cycling. Higher miles equals more cycles, although this isn't always the case when we compare one model of car to another. For instance, for the same mileage, a Nissan Leaf with a 73-mile range will typically have completed many more cycles than, say, a Model S with a 265-mile range. The second group of aging mechanisms are those that lead to calendar aging. Calendar aging is degradation that occurs over time regardless of the number of cycles. You may have an old lithium battery that has hardly been cycled, but it will still have lost capacity over time. This is a very important consideration when looking at old EVs. Even if the car has low miles, it could have a lot of degradation. There's a reason that Nissan, Chevy, and Tesla all warranty their batteries both to a mileage number and an age, whichever comes first. So what exactly is happening to lithium-ion batteries as they age, and is there anything that will either accelerate or slow down the aging process? When it comes to cyclic aging, a paper by Keil and others suggests that there are two main mechanisms that are responsible: cathode or anode damage and lithium plating. Looking at calendar aging, there's also two mechanisms: passivation layers and electrolyte oxidation. These are the four most prominent mechanisms. I say most prominent because the internal workings and degradation mechanisms of a lithium-ion cell are very complex, much more complex than I currently understand or have time to get into today. Before we take a dive into degradation, let's go back to our idealized battery. As the battery is charged and discharged, the lithium ions shuffle back and forth between the cathode and the anode. The capacity of the battery is directly tied to the amount of lithium that's available to make this repeated journey back and forth. If any of the lithium becomes trapped in or blocked from entering either the cathode or the anode, the battery will lose capacity. Lithium can also get tied up in other reactions inside the battery, and this can lead to deposits or plating of lithium compounds. As the battery is cycled, the cathode material or structure can also be damaged. This damage is due to the motion of lithium ions entering and leaving the cathode. I like to think of the cathode as two sheets of metal, with the lithium being like marbles that are repeatedly forced between the sheets. Over time, this repeated mechanical stress can lead to cracking of the sheets. And once the cathode begins to crack, some regions become electrically isolated. And this prevents electrons and lithium ions in the isolated region from migrating back to the anode during charging. The second mechanism responsible for cyclic aging is lithium plating. Lithium plating primarily occurs at the anode during charging. The higher the charge rate, the greater the number of electrons that are being driven from the cathode to the anode. As the electron flow increases, so does the flow of lithium ions across the separator. These lithium ions have to be received into the graphite matrix to balance their charge with the electrons. And the problem here is that the graphite has a maximum rate at which it can accept lithium ions. If this rate is exceeded, the lithium ions begin to build up on the anode. And ideally, when the charging stops, as lithium will deplate and work its way into the anode. However, there can also be reactions with the electrolyte, and this can form some permanent surface films on the anode. The first calendar aging mechanism is the formation of inert layers on the surface of the anode. The most important of these layers is called the solid electrolyte interface, or the SEI. This layer is formed by reactions between the electrolyte and the anode, and it grows the most during the first few cycles. Forming the SEI layer does consume a lithium, but it's actually beneficial, and manufacturers want it to happen. See, the SEI layer is electrically isolating, and it helps prevent electrons in the anode from tunneling across the separator and the electrolyte to the cathode. Although the SEI layer blocks electrons, lithium ions can still pass through it, and this allows the battery to function normally. Ideally, once the anode surface is entirely covered by the SEI layer, it stops growing. However, during cycling, the SEI layer can be broken up, and this will expose fresh anode material to the electrolyte, and this allows more SEI to form, depleting lithium in the electrolyte. When the battery is charged and the cathode has a high positive charge, electrons can be stripped from the lithium-based electrolyte in a process called electrolyte oxidation. The positively charged lithium ions formed during this process are drawn out of the electrolyte and balance the charge at the cathode. Over time, this reaction depletes the amount of lithium in the electrolyte, and according to Jeff Dahn's group, can eventually kill the battery. While some battery degradation is inevitable, the important thing to know is that it's significantly influenced by how the battery is operated and stored. Temperature is the big one here, particularly high temperatures. Unfortunately, the battery does not even need to be in active use for heat to impact the degradation. I think you can see the issue here for electric cars that are going to be parked all day in a sunny parking lot. Cold weather can also decrease the battery capacity, but only temporarily until warm temperatures return. The main issue with cold is during charging. If the battery is charged while it's too cold, it can be irreversibly damaged by lithium plating. The relationship between high temperatures and capacity loss is well documented. In these findings here, you can see that at 25 degrees Celsius, the cells lost around 7% of their original capacity after 100 cycles. However, when the operating temperature was increased to 45 Celsius, over 12% of the original capacity was lost over the same number of cycles. As we know, the battery degradation is directly linked to the number of charge and discharge cycles, but it's less well known that a partial cycle does not count the same as a full cycle. What do I mean? Well, a battery that is discharged from 100% to 0% will experience more degradation per cycle than one that's discharged from, say, 80% to 20%. The percentage of capacity that is used during a cycle is called the depth of discharge, and researchers have studied this depth of discharge effect for years. In this data set here, we see that when a battery was drained from 100 to 25%, the capacity fell below 80% of its original value by 4,000 cycles. A depth of discharge between 85 and 25% performed better, but the best performance was for a depth of discharge between 75 and 65%. After 8,000 cycles, this battery has maintained more than 90% of its original capacity, which is quite remarkable. When it comes to EVs, manufacturers know this, and normally they do not allow the driver to access the battery's entire capacity. This means the battery has a built-in restriction on the depth of discharge, and that helps the battery age better. Anyone with an electric car wants to be able to supercharge it as quickly as possible because it allows them to get back on the road sooner. Unfortunately, it's often suggested that high rates of charge can reduce battery life. High rates of charge are thought to lead to lithium plating, and it can also potentially damage the SEI layer. Higher charge rates can also heat up the battery, which we've already talked about. The Idaho National Laboratory cycled batteries at charge rates typical of level 2 and DC fast chargers. Level 2 chargers are typically used to charge when you're at home or at a destination, and charging can take several hours. The DC fast chargers are used while you're on road trips to top up your car in less than an hour. The researchers found that DC fast charging did degrade the battery slightly faster, but the difference was very small. Interestingly, when they charged the cells at 30 Celsius instead of 20 Celsius, the increase in temperature had a much greater impact on battery capacity than the fast charging did. From this, it would appear that if an EV can properly cool its batteries during a fast charge, there should be little impact on degradation. So if you want your EV to last a really long time, maybe you should move to Alaska and minimize that depth of discharge. You only need to drive 10 miles a day, right? But okay, before we go to those extremes, let's just take a look at how real-world EV batteries are holding up. You know, under normal conditions, not in Alaska, and driving normal distances. For this, we need to look at some long-term real-world data. And fortunately for us, electric vehicles like the Tesla Model S and the Nissan Leaf have been in production for almost a decade. Through the end of 2019, the Nissan Leaf was the most popular EV in the world. Between December 2010 and December 2019, around 450,000 Leafs were sold globally. Would it be Leaves? Nissan was super early to the EV game. For a bit of context, back in 2010, Tesla only had their original Roadster on the road. The Tesla Model S had been unveiled the year before, but it would be another 2 years until 2012 when that entered production. This gives us nearly a decade of Leaf battery data. And contrary to what some headlines say, Leaf battery degradation is an issue. By 2012, Leaf owners in Arizona were beginning to report that their cars were losing battery capacity bars. For some context, in a first-generation Leaf, when you lose that first capacity bar, you've already lost 15% of the battery capacity. And a 15% reduction in capacity in a car with a 73-mile range is huge. Now, these preliminary cases in the hot American Southwest shine a spotlight straight on the Leaf's biggest issue. Unlike virtually every other EV, Leafs do not have an active battery thermal management system. They simply rely on passive air cooling to maintain the battery temperatures. There isn't even a fan to cool the battery. And this is a very strange decision given the strong influence of temperature on battery longevity. It's particularly concerning as vehicles cannot always be parked indoors. And I'm sure you know that interior temperatures can easily exceed 40 or 50 Celsius in hot, sunny locations. So let's look at the data for first-generation Leafs that are now over 8 years old. The New Zealand EV promotion organization Flip the Fleet has collected over 2,000 battery capacity measurements for the oldest Leafs. On average, this data shows that after 8 years, you can expect battery capacity to be reduced to 70% of its original capacity. Similar data has been collected by Plug in America for more than 360 Leafs. The Plug-in America data is similar to the Flip the Fleet data, although it does show a slightly greater capacity loss for a similar age. Obviously, this data is troubling if you're looking to purchase a used Leaf. The car could be as cheap as $5,000, but if its usable range has dropped below 50 miles on a good day, how good of a deal is that really? Now, I know many of you are probably already commenting away that 50 miles is plenty for around town, which is normally true. However, it's shockingly short for even moderate range trips to the next town over, especially if you can't or you don't have time to charge at your turnaround destination. Moreover, if you live in a place with winter like I do, you need to consider that during the cold months, the range will be reduced quite a bit further. But hold on, before you call it a day and walk away from used EVs, let's take a look at the market leader Tesla. For simplicity, I'm only considering the Model S, which was released in late 2012. Today, there are a lot of 2012 or 2013 Model S's for sale at prices as low as $22,000, assuming you're okay with buying a car that has well in excess of 100,000 miles. There's a Dutch-Belgium Tesla owner forum that has been maintaining an excellent battery degradation spreadsheet for many years. As of the spring of 2020, it contains over 1,300 Model S entries, and if we plot the remaining battery capacity versus battery age, we see that a polynomial regression trend line is trending towards 90% of the original capacity after 6 to 8 years. Some of these cars have logged over 170,000 miles with battery capacities still in excess of 90%. There's a second database provided by Plug-in America that lays nicely over the Dutch-Belgium data. There are a handful of outliers with battery capacities at or below 80%, but this data clearly shows that Tesla battery packs are lasting a very long time, unlike the Leaf. So why the big difference between the cars? Well, for one thing, Tesla batteries have active liquid thermal management, which is vastly superior to the Leaf's, well, total lack of thermal management. If the Tesla is charging, accelerating, or parked in a hot parking lot, the cooling system can kick in and keep the cells at their optimal temperature. Another advantage is Tesla's very large battery. With usable ranges easily in excess of 200 miles, Teslas not only require less frequent charging, aka cycling, but most drivers will use a smaller percentage of the battery between charges, and this shallower depth of discharge will keep the battery healthy longer. There are also some newer EVs with large liquid-cooled batteries that are showing good initial degradation numbers. A good case in point is the Chevy Bolt, which came out in 2017. Eric Way of the News Coulomb YouTube channel reported that after 3 years and 100,000 miles, his 2017 Bolt has lost about 8% of its original capacity. I've compiled data from several other Bolt battery databases and surveys, and in total, this data only represents 15 vehicles, which isn't terribly relevant statistically, but it's a good estimate of where the Bolt battery performance is going. And so far, degradation appears to be trending like the Model S, not like the Nissan Leaf. This all leaves me feeling a bit uncertain as to the answer of my original question, which was how long will used EV batteries last? It all depends on the vehicle and to a lesser extent where it's from and how it was used. In the case of the first Nissan Leafs, I'd be highly skeptical of their battery health, especially if they come from hot climates. There are some tools out there such as the Leaf Spy app, which can help buyers check the status of a battery before they make a purchase. Still, this isn't perfect, and in my opinion, Leaf buyers should be prepared for noticeable battery degradation. Used Teslas, on the other hand, appear to be holding up very well with age. This, combined with their much higher initial range, means that even degraded Teslas will continue to provide highly usable range. I personally would not hesitate to buy a Tesla with over 100,000 miles on it, assuming the price was right. The neat thing about the battery data I've presented is that it is for the very first mass market EVs, and battery technology has improved a lot in the past 10 years, and it's going to continue to do so. As of this recording, Tesla is about to unveil some new battery tech at their Battery Day event. Elon Musk has said that this event will be one of the most exciting days in Tesla's history. And last year, in 2019, Elon promised that a 1,000,000-mile battery would be coming soon, and it's widely expected that the Battery Day event will discuss the details of this battery. So there are a lot of battery improvements coming, and I wouldn't be surprised that in 10 to 20 years, battery degradation may not even be a question anymore. Well, there's a lot more to battery technology than I can discuss here, so I've put a playlist here of some other great videos I've come across. And alternatively, you can check out another one of my videos here. Well, I'm Josh. This is Nicola Garage. I'll catch you in the next one.